I'm Bill Radke, sitting with the two candidates who would like your vote to represent Washington's 9th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. The 9th includes Bellevue and part of Seattle and down through Renton, Tukwila, Kent, Federal Way, and Tacoma. Democrat Adam Smith represents the district now. His opponent, Sarah Smith, is a Democratic socialist living in Kent. I want to thank both of you for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for the chance.
We are going to dig into the issues here for about 25 minutes, and I want to give you, as I told you earlier, I want to give you equal time to speak. So if I need to tell you to wrap up your point, it's in the interest of equal time, okay?
All right.
Okay. I'm going to start by letting you tell us why we should vote for you. And I'll give you about a minute here. Representative Smith, why should we give you another term?
Thank you. I grew up in SeaTac, and I'm very connected to this district. I grew up in a blue-collar family, and I have been passionately committed to equality of opportunity, since my father first started taking me to campaign meetings when I was a teenager. So I understand the district, and I'm passionately committed to the issues that are most important to it. On economic opportunity, I supported the minimum wage in SeaTac, first in the nation, $15 minimum wage. I supported expanding access to health care for nearly 30 million people. I voted for a carbon tax and cap and trade to combat climate change. And just most recently, I introduced a bill on community and technical colleges because job training and job skills are so important. I want to make sure that the working class families in my district have better opportunities than I had growing up. They had those same opportunities to basically pursue their hopes and dreams by getting the education and support they need.
Sarah Smith, why should you be the new Congress member from the 9th District?
Because we're in an era of absolutely unprecedented change. We're in an era where the working families of this district, including myself, are tired of suffering under corporate ownership of our government. And we have an opportunity to demand better of our representatives. We have an opportunity to uncouple corporate money and corporate greed from our government. This is our moment to elect representation for this district that's focused only on the people of this district and that recognizes the importance of that seat to fight for what matters to us, fighting against climate change, for healthcare, for education, for better infrastructure. We have an opportunity in 2018 to ride that big blue wave and make big, progressive, bold changes coming right out of this district. We need somebody who wants to lead for this district, not just wait for someone else to pick up the tails and lead behind them. This is what I want to do. I want to be that powerful forefront voice for this district. I believe in us, I believe in our values, and I believe in what we're capable of.
Thanks to you both for that. Congressman Smith, what is your proudest accomplishment in your time in office and why?
Well, I'd say the proudest accomplishment is the passage of the minimum wage in SeaTac, and because that directly impacts the issues. And the thing is, my opinion is, I think we already have exactly the type of leader that Sarah just described. I have been out front, I've been, like I said, working on politics since I was 15 years old and working for this district on all of the issues that Sarah just mentioned. As far as corporate greed is concerned, I've opposed every single tax cut. And on the minimum wage, business was adamantly opposed to it. But this is where I grew up. My father worked at the airport, and people 30 years after he passed away were making less money to do the same job. So being a leader on that $15 minimum wage to actually start trying to pay people a decent wage would be the one thing.
What was your role in that minimum wage?
I endorsed it and was a strong supporter of it. The campaign came to me early on because having grown up in SeaTac, my father working at the airport, my connection to the district would make a huge difference in the campaign.
And Sarah Smith, if you were to imagine choosing one proudest accomplishment in a first term, what do you imagine that accomplishment would realistically be?
For me, realistically, I believe that it would be introducing a bill to uncouple corporate money from our political system, to basically amend it so that we have publicly funded elections, that we're able to clean them up as much as we can before we're able to push for an amendment to overturn Citizens United. That, to me, has to be the first and foremost fight we take on if we're going to fight back against corporate greed. If we want any kind of strong progressive agenda passed in Congress, then we have to be fighting against the influence of corporate money and what it has on our Congress.
I do want to talk more about corporate money. We're going to do that right now. Since some of us are just getting to know you, Sarah Smith, you volunteered with the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016. What is a democratic socialist?
Democratic socialism, to sum it up pretty simply, is when we're faced with an economic crisis, democratic socialists are going to vote to bail out the people, whereas everybody else is going to vote to bail out the banks. And that's really what I want to do. I'm here to represent working people. I'm here to fight for working people. I'm here to ensure that people that are building up wealth for corporations have a say in that wealth, that we have an economic democracy and not just a social democracy, that we ensure workers actually have a voice in their wages, in the way that their businesses are run, that they're actually represented on boards, that all of this wealth that's being generated doesn't just get taken from them while they get pushed into their cars to sleep out of tents in the streets, that they're able to actually live a dignified life, and that we focus our federal efforts on supplying that dignified life for them through healthcare, through housing. By meeting people's basic needs, we empower them economically, and that's really what democratic socialism is about.
Representative Smith, what's your understanding of how you, a Democrat, are different from a Democratic Socialist?
Well, I don't really focus on labels. I focus on issues. I focus on helping people on the issues that are going to matter most to them. And I am already a co-sponsor of a whole bunch of different constitutional amendments to get rid of Citizens United and stop corporate money. And that's where it really got off the rails, was when Citizens United overturned McCain-Feingold. Because this is the thing. People focus on how much money, a corporation or any PAC or corporations can't give money to candidates, but PACs give. It's the independent expenditures that are killing us. I mean, look at the campaign on the carbon tax. As I mentioned, I support a carbon tax. I've been very clear about that. I'm co-sponsor of a bill in the United States Congress to do that. But look at all of the money that Big Oil is pouring into the campaign to defeat 1631. That's independent expenditures. That's money that we ought to be able to regulate. And actually, we should have the vision that Sarah just said. We should have a publicly financed system. Arizona had that. Arizona had a governor's campaign 10 years ago that was completely publicly financed. Neither candidate raised any money. And then the Supreme Court struck that down. So we need a constitutional amendment. We need to change the courts. But it's the independent expenditures that are just flooding our states with money that don't even have anything to do with candidates that we really need to go after.
Well, Representative, some other Democrats have refused campaign donations from corporate PACs, including Representative Pramila Jayapal. Why are you accepting campaign donations from corporate PACs?
Because, number one, it's unquestionable that I stand up to corporations. I don't, like I said, I support the carbon tax. I opposed all of the tax cuts. I supported the health care bill. Number two, I think no matter where you get your money from, you better not vote the way your donors demand of you. You better be independent. And that's what I've always been. I've lost a lot of donors throughout the years. One of my first votes in Congress was to oppose building more B-2 bombers. I thought it was an incredible waste of money. So Northrop Grumman didn't give me money for a very long time. And I'm okay with that. When I supported the minimum wage in SeaTac, Alaska Airlines and a bunch of other folks stopped giving me money for a little while. They're supporting me in this campaign. So I think no matter where you get your money from, what you need to look at with a representative is, are they willing to vote their district when it conflicts with that money? Because even if you're getting it from non-corporations, even if you're getting it from large organizations, left, right, center, whatever, they better not control your vote. And what people know from my record, nobody controls my vote. I do what I think is in the best interest of my district, no matter where I've raised my money.
Before Sarah Smith responds, Congressman, if you're independent from the corporations, why take the PAC money then?
Well, PAC money, first of all, was a campaign finance reform itself. PAC money corporations are not allowed to donate. They raise money from their individuals in the company. And here's the great thing. You have so many people saying they don't take corporate PAC money, but they take money from executives in the corporations. Every single one of these people who says, I don't take corporate PAC money, will not turn down a check from a person who works for the corporation, even an executive. That's where the PAC money's raised. It's from the same source. It's really more of a political slogan. Like I said, if you want to get at the corrupting influence of money, and I agree, the money, the influence of corporate money, it's the independent expenditures. That's where they're able to dump unlimited money. And by the way, not transparent. People can look at my record and they can see, well, here's where he got his money. How did he vote? On these independent expenditures, you don't know where the money is coming from. And it is the most I can get from any PAC is $5,000 in a primary. All right. Unlimited money on independent expenditures. That's what we need to go after if you want to stop their influence. Corporations could stop giving any money, any PAC money whatsoever, to elected officials, and you would still have undue influence from corporate monies through independent expenditures. That's the issue that I've gone after consistently.
Challenger Sarah Smith, your response.
My response is pretty simple. I mean, I do agree with the congressman that there's this nuance of language that's being used against people. They're weaponizing progressive language. But that's why I specifically go out and say I don't accept money from deep-pocketed donors, from special interests, or from PACs, or from corporate PACs. I specifically go out of my way to identify, because the fact is that whether or not you think money influences your vote, it influences you in other ways. And every donor that drops off because of a vote, two more pop into their place because of a different vote. There is a corrupting influence of corporate money in our system. It exists. 93% of Americans believe that. And that's on both sides of the aisle. That's not just Democrats. That's not just Republicans. That's everybody. 93% of America believes in the corrupting influence of corporations. And a lot of the times what they're buying is something a lot more sinister. They're not just buying this terrible vote. They're not buying bad bills. Instead of speech, they're buying silence. Instead of action, they're buying inaction. They're buying feet dragging. They're buying nuanced arguments. They're buying excuses. They're buying reasons not to co-sponsor bills. And our district is not exempt from that.
Will you give one example of that?
Of course. You see it in the major 3 climate change bills that are currently in the House right now. Right now, we have 3 major bills geared at fighting climate change, which is a national security threat. That's actually a quote from the congressman. And this is the 11th hour to fight back against climate change. And the fact is we have this carbon tax coming into Washington state because of a failure of the government to step in and do something about climate change for over 22 years. For decades, we've known about climate change. But the fact is that Adam receives a lot of money from corporations to come up with excuses and reasons not to co-sponsor these 3 bills.
That's dead wrong. I have been a co-sponsor for a long time of a carbon tax on the federal level. This is the greatest example of why, Sarah should be running against somebody else. Okay, maybe she'd have a good argument against somebody who hasn't done what I've done. But on the carbon tax, that's the bill that I sponsored. The 3 bills that she mentioned don't have a carbon tax. They don't go after the issue. The other thing that those 3 bills don't have is they don't take some of that money and help poor people deal with any problems they have with increased costs of energy. The bill that I have sponsored is the better bill. Okay, it's the one that actually goes after climate change. And I have done it consistently and relentlessly. They're not buying my silence. And corporations, one of their number one biggest priorities in the state was passage of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I was the only member of Congress in the state of Washington before the bill was introduced to publicly say I oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Corporate donors didn't like that. It is absolutely wrong to say that they're buying anything from me because I have not been silent on any of these issues.
This is Congressmember Adam Smith representing the 9th District and his opponent, Sarah Smith, a Democratic socialist. And we're helping you work through this election coming up in November in the District number 9, and that's Bellevue and parts of Seattle through South King County and Tacoma. We have brought up the carbon tax. Where do both of you stand on Initiative 1631, Sarah Smith, the Washington State carbon fee on carbon emitters?
I think that it's a great step forwards in the right direction. We need to have a carbon tax, and I'm so proud of us here in Washington for being able to step up to the plate and do that and fight for that carbon tax. And this is just indicative of a larger problem, though. So we're trying to fight back against climate change, and the carbon tax is a great way to start. But because we've had no action from the federal government, we've forced states to go state by state and treat it like a state's issue. Climate change is not a state by state issue. It is a global issue. We need to have these state partnerships with a federal plan to fight back against climate change. But I think it's a great place to start. I've been looking into the exemptions that they have for a lot of the major contributors to carbon in the state as well. And then on the federal level, too, we need to be addressing the same problem. The top 100 polluters create 70% of the carbon emissions that we're suffering under. And climate change is imminent. It is happening now. We have to start with a carbon tax here in Washington state, but we need to bring that fight to the federal level. Otherwise, nothing is going to get done.
So you're a yes on this state initiative. What about you, Congressman?
Yeah, I'm a big yes on the state initiative. And also I want to point out, in 2009, I voted for the cap and trade bill that we had in Congress. That was the approach then to put a charge on carbon. And the argument I would make is, yes, it did not pass Congress, all right? It passed the House. It didn't pass the Senate. I am a member of Congress who stood up to the corporations and took the vote on an unpopular cap and trade bill. And then to say, well, because other people in Congress didn't do it, you need to replace me? That doesn't make any sense. What you need to do if you want people who are going to stand up to the corporations and combat climate change and take tough votes on taxes like a carbon tax and a cap and trade bill, well, then if they vote for it, if they stand up to them, that's not when you say, yeah, but those other people didn't vote for it, so we're going to blame you anyway. Look, I do what I can do as one member of the Congress, but I've done it, and I've stood up on this issue for a very long time.
Another area where you differ, because you agree on a lot, but you differ on government spending, particularly when it comes to the military. Representative Smith, if you're reelected, you are in a position to chair the House Armed Services Committee if the Democrats take the House majority. Why have you voted more than once to increase the military budget?
I have also voted against the defense budget. I think it's about 7 or 8 times. I forget how many times it has come up, and a number of times because it is too big. And this year, the defense appropriations bill was tied to the labor health bill. And the labor health bill had massive increases for education, for health care. Only 6 Democrats in the United States Congress voted against the defense appropriations bill this year. So yes, I did vote for it. I think it is too much money. It's a $720 billion budget. It should be cut. But given what it was tied to this year, and given the opportunity to keep the government open, we needed to do that. But I have been outspoken. In fact, if you read conservative opinions about what if the Democrats take back the House, one of the biggest arguments you will see, you can't let Adam Smith be chairman of the Armed Services Committee because he wants to cut the defense budget. And they're right. I think there's way too much waste, way too much inefficiency.
What's one thing you would cut?
Nuclear weapons. Gosh, I'd cut them by more than half. Nuclear weapons need to be dramatically reduced. We also need, sorry, I'm speaking fast. I know this is a complicated subject. I'm trying to get through it all. Base closure. We have entirely too many bases and infrastructure in this country, which is wasting money.
Any Washington State bases need to go?
Put them on the list. Let's have the conversation. I mean, we are in a position where our bases are more secure than most. But I'm not going to stand up and defend wasteful spending just because it happens to be coming to my state. The taxpayers deserve to get the best thing out of their dollar. And I'm sorry, I've talked too long.
Sarah Smith, you're an anti-war activist. You've said the greatest military threat to the United States is the U.S. military?
Yes. I mean, I maintain that statement. I stand by it. We've shoveled $5.6 trillion into the war in Afghanistan and the Middle East. We have been shoveling so much money into the war machine that we are neglecting our own infrastructure. 25 miles from here, we just had a bridge collapse not that long ago. We have been neglecting our people in favor of this cycle of endless war, and we've trapped ourselves in this economy of violence because of that endless cycle of war. It's been 17 years since the war in Iraq began. Right now, it's almost old enough to vote. This is a ridiculously long time to be trapped in this cycle. And the fact is, Congressman Smith and I do agree on cutting military spending. It's worth pointing out that he did vote in favor of the inflated Trump bill. It was more than what Donald Trump was asking for. And that is a problem. And while I recognize his reasoning, it is still a problem. Because the reason this budget is getting so big and the reason all these different things exist in the appropriations bills are because we've failed to act on them outside of the military in any other capacity because we're hemorrhaging money into the military-industrial complex. And the fact remains that 60% of the military budget is going into the pockets of private donors. They're going to the pockets of private corporations, of private businesses like Northrop Grumman, like Raytheon. And we are seeing our tax dollars go towards bombing other countries instead of coming in and building up our schools, building up educational opportunities for our kids, providing us health care, providing us with a solid infrastructure. We've spent too much money on war and not enough money on the people in this country.
Any disagreement, Congressman?
Yeah, well, just quick it's the war in Afghanistan that's been going on for 17 years. But second of all, I don't agree with the statement that the United States military is the greatest threat to our national security. First of all, because I have a lot of respect for the people who serve in the military, and I don't see them as a threat to our country. But second of all, we do face national security threats. Terrorist groups. I mean, I was in Washington, D.C. on 9/11. You still have ISIS. You still have al-Qaeda. You still have, Russia pushing its way into Eastern Europe, China trying to push people out of Southeast Asia. So we do need a national security strategy. And one of the big arguments I make is I would be the most progressive chairman of the Armed Services Committee since Ron Dellums. I would be in a position to advance a progressive agenda from a position of power, including, by the way, back to our old friend climate change. I got the language into the bill that said climate change is a threat to our national security, and the Department of Defense is actually one of the biggest investors in green energy, and in large part that's because of me and a bunch of other people who have pushed that issue.
So, Sarah Smith, what's a better national security strategy? He described a strategy of a position of power.
Sure. So I think we need to stop basing our position of power on our arsenals. We need to stop basing our position of power on our ability to swing our military arm and topple other countries. We need to have a military that's focused on humanitarian efforts. So if we have the opportunity to go out to the people, to these developing and disenfranchised countries, we have the ability to help build up their clean water, provide them a better quality of life, help them build schools, help them build wind farms and solar farms. We have a real opportunity to go to the ground and use our military force to fight for those people at the bottom. Because the fact is, when you look at organizations like Al-Qaeda, like terrorist organizations across the globe, they use fear tactics in order to recruit people. And they utilize those fear tactics by pointing out how horrible we are because we keep dropping cluster bombs on their villages and killing the people in their nation. So it's easy to paint us as this horrible bad guy and recruit those people and build up that terrorist threat even more. There are studies out there that have shown it's gotten worse since we intervened. And the fact is, we need to fight back against that. And you don't fight a bad idea by bombing it. You fight a bad idea with a good idea. And if you take away the teeth of their argument is that we're the killers in the Middle East, then you take away their ability to recruit people.
Well, let's talk about building up the infrastructure in the United States. Again, that's challenger Sarah Smith running to represent Washington's 9th District, and the incumbent Adam Smith is with us as well on KUOW. Sarah, you said you wanted to invest $4.6 trillion over 10 to 15 years in freight and commuter infrastructure, better rail systems. How would you go about that any differently from Congressman Smith? And I'll let him respond.
So I think this is one area where Congressman Smith and I actually agree. And I do respect the work that he's done to fight to increase our ports and increase our freight. I think it is important that we have world-class freight systems here, especially in the Pacific Northwest. It's crucial. But I think that, we need to divert that. I go back all the time to military spending. We have a lot of areas of opportunity where we can increase federal funding by decreasing the amount we're spending on private corporations and private contractors. And we can also increase the amount of taxation we put on the people who can bear it. So those major corporations, the billionaire class, we are able to lift the tax burden off the people in the lower and working classes and the middle class and put it onto the people who can bear that burden. And with increased tax funding, this is a meaningful investment we can make. The fact remains that if we can invest $5.6 trillion over 17 years in a war in Afghanistan, we can invest $4.6 trillion in our own infrastructure to build up our own roads and our own highway systems. This also leads into an entirely new Green Deal. This is part of it, because when you have better infrastructure, when people can actually utilize meaningful public transit to get from work and to get home and to get to parks, when people are able to use their cars less, that's going to have a positive impact on our efforts to get into green energy.
Any response, Representative Smith?
I by and large agree with that. The one thing I would add is where we've really wasted the money is on all of the tax cuts going all the way back to the Bush tax cut in 2001. And again, I voted against every single one of those tax cuts. And I think one of the greatest missed opportunities for the Democratic Party was in 2012 when the Bush tax cuts expired and we made them permanent. Almost all of them, with a couple of exceptions. I was one, about half the Democrats voted against it, and I voted against that tax cut. You can't keep cutting taxes by the trillions and trillions of dollars for the wealthy and for the corporations like we've done, like the $2 trillion tax cut we just passed. Imagine, what if we didn't do that, instead took that $2 trillion and invested it in infrastructure? And again, I will make the point, I respect her. I think she's running against the wrong person, all right? I took those votes. There are Democrats out there who voted for the 2001 Bush tax cut, who voted for the 2012 permanent extension of it. I'm not one of them. I stood up to it precisely because I want the money for all those things that Sarah just talked about.
Incumbent Adam Smith, challenger Sarah Smith, running to represent the 9th District, which is a majority-minority district, the first in Washington state. Why are voters choosing between two white people, Congressman?
Well, I think it's because I have done an outstanding job of doing outreach to my diverse district. And this is something that I always say. If you can't run for office and say, this district's going to vote for me because I'm exactly like them. Well, we speak 160 different languages in the 9th District. Regrettably, I only speak one. I think you only speak one, too.
I do. I took Latin in college, but...
Yeah. I took Spanish forever. I couldn't quite master it. But anyway, the point is I have done very aggressive outreach to communities of color. And one of, both in terms of who I hire in my office, but also in terms of supporting candidates throughout the 9th District. We need more people of color. And you know what? We have more people of color. Jesse Johnson in Federal Way, young African-American. Satminder Kaur, an Indian-American woman in Kent. Vandana Slaughter, who is a state legislator in the 48th District. My Linh Thai, who is a Vietnamese American now running in the 41st. I've supported all these candidates. Rebecca Saldana, who's a state senator. So I have done very aggressive outreach to the diverse communities. And this is the 4th election in majority-minority district. They have consistently supported me because they see someone who is going to fight for equality of opportunity for everyone, who's going to fight racism.
Sarah?
So I believe that what it comes down to is it comes down to people's ability to be empowered to do this. Because let me tell you, running for office as a working class person is hard. I am working full time, actually, on top of campaigning full time, and it is incredibly difficult. And if, the people in my life that I care about were not part of the campaign, I would never see them. And it's been a really difficult struggle because the fact is that a majority of the people living in poverty, living in working class conditions, are communities of color. And they need legislation that's going to empower them to do that, to be able to choose to run a race, to run for Congress, or afford to feed their families and fight for a roof over their heads. And the fact is we need to be using that office to recognize that that's part of this struggle as well. Part of how we get representation is we continue to empower people, not just through lifting them up when they do run, but by elevating their circumstances so that they have the ability to run, so that they have the financial means to run a race like this and not worry about losing their homes.
Well, this is our time for today. In the 9th District, incumbent Adam Smith, challenger Sarah Smith. Let me just give you each 30 more seconds to give any final thoughts. Representative Smith?
I just want to thank you for hosting this debate and robust discussion. And my final thought is this is an incredibly important election. I think everybody needs to get out and vote and express their viewpoints. And I guess the final thing I would say is we need to improve public discourse in this country. Of the many things that Donald Trump has done that are truly awful, the worst is just the way he denigrates people when he talks and divides us. We need to bring people together so that we can work on the truly important issues that we've talked about today.
Sarah Smith, final thought?
Final thought, especially thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for Congressman for speaking with me at a bunch of different forums that we've been going to. But I mean, final thoughts, this is an incredibly important election. I can't really say it much better than that. We have the chance to fight to get corporate greed out of our politics. We have the chance to fight for representation that's going to stand up and put us first and make sure that we're truly represented in our government. And I think this is our moment to do it. This is our moment to lead in the 9th District.
Sarah Smith and Adam Smith on your ballot if you're in the 9th District of Washington State. I want to thank both of you for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.